Hello, in this video I'm going to go over my tier list for Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous Companions, specifically when playing on core difficulty and above. Basically, I'm going to evaluate the essential characters you're going to meet on your journey and judge them based off of three important criterion. These are their damage output or DPS, their support capabilities, which comes in the form of healing, buffs, crowd control, and summon. Last but not least is their survivability. Now, all of these categories are important regardless of your role in the party. Just because you're not a tank does not mean survivability is pointless. You know, if you're the healer and you die, that could mean game over, especially if you're playing on the Last Azanti mode. And while Last Stand is very helpful in keeping you alive, it's not an end-all be-all solution. With that said, let's get started. The first we have is Arueshalae, and she is an easy S tier in terms of damage output. She gets the favor enemy mechanic, and if you level her up all the way to level 20 as the espionage expert, she gets a plus 10 to attack and damage roll. But you can improve that further if you do some dips into the Magus archetype, Eldritch Archer, which allows her to get the Elemental Barrage mythic ability. She also has Sense Vitals for sneak attack die. So her damage is going to be insane. And she's going to have very high attack bonus. So, yep, S tier all the way. In terms of her support, I would rank her as a B tier. She doesn't have a lot of buffs. And the ones that you get are going to be, you know, weaker than that of a druid. Because she is 3 levels caster below that of a regular full caster. As a ranger. Yeah, and most of the spells you want to be using with her is Sense Vitals for her own damage output and Instant Enemy. Now this is where her support comes in, is with the fact that she gets Ranger's Bond and allows her to share half of her favorite enemy bonuses to all your party members. So that could be upwards of a plus 5. Yeah, so what you need to do basically is to just max out on one favorite enemy type and then just use instant enemy and then Ranger's Bond. She doesn't have any good CC, in my opinion. She gets Entanglement and Sickening Entanglement, but the DC is way too low despite her high charisma. And even if you heighten it, you can't go above level 4, so I think it's pointless for her. She has some healing, but it's not amazing, and she gets no summons. So overall, B tier in terms of support. In terms of her survivability, I would rank her as a B or C tier. She's a C tier if you don't use any items, because she doesn't really get a lot. She has good stats, which helps her AC, but it's not enough to make her tanky. She gets Chameleon Stride, which is a 20% illusion-based concealment, but that gets pierced by True Seeing. And yeah, she's just not very tanky from my experience. Now, you could make her a lot more tankier by multi-classing, and also by using a lot more scrolls in the game. So, you know, she doesn't get stuff like Sea Mantle, but if you use Sea Mantle, then yes, her AC starts becoming to the point where it's actually decent. Besides that, if you're just going on purely on self buffs and not a lot of itemization in the game, I would put her at C tier. So overall, she's an S in terms of damage, B in terms of support, and C or B depending on whether you use scrolls for survivability. So I would put her as either a mid to low A tier, in my opinion. She's very strong, but she is mostly used for her damage output and the fact that she could give more damage and attack bonuses to the entire party. Next, we have Camellia. In terms of her damage output, I'll rank her as an A. She gets Elemental Barrage later on in the game, right? And with her weapon enchantments, that is a lot of damage right there. On top of that, she gets weapon specialization and greater weapon focus. So with Mythic Weapon Focus, she is getting a +4 to attack, which makes her almost a full BAB class. She gets a lot of self buffs, you know, divine power, righteous might, frightful aspect. These are all gonna make her damage output even better than it is. Then she gets Bane on top of that, and yeah, that is not bad in my opinion. She's using a high crit weapon, and I mean, even though she's not dual wielding or anything like that, there's still a lot of damage, especially if you get a combat reflexes with her and you just boost up her attack of opportunities that she can get. She's pretty strong in terms of damage. In terms of her support, I would also put her as an A tier. She gets some really nice spells, which is a mix of, well, Shaman is basically a mix of Druid, Divine, and Arcane spellcasting. So there's a lot of good support buffs that she can give. So, for example, Bark Skin, she's the only one that gives Bark Skin if you don't have a Druid, aside from Arueshalae, and Arueshalae Bark Skin maxes out at level 15 compared to her, which is level 12. She gets, you know, all the protection spells, so that's very strong. She gets healing, right? So that's another part of support. And she gets very good summons, especially Creeping Doom, which is one of the best summons in the entire game. And in terms of her CC and debuffing, she gets hexes, right? So stuff like Evil Eye is really strong. What else? Misfortune. Her debuffing from spells are good at low levels. So for example, Entanglement, Sickening Entanglement, you actually get her early enough for those to be useful. And then she also gets Stinking Cloud. But then later on, these spells are just going to be not as useful. You're going to be fighting flying enemies, so Entanglement and stuff is not going to be useful. And a lot of the demons are going to be immune to poison, so that falls off. But because she has hexes, like, those are going to be decent CC even until the late game. Now, in terms of her survivability, I would put her as an easy S tier. She gets a lot of AC, especially from self buffs. You could get Sea Mantle, you get Frightful Aspect. Yeah, you get Winds of Vengeance, which gives her 50% concealment against range attacks. That is not pierced by True Seeing because it's an evocation spell and not an illusion spell. And she becomes really fast with that, right? So you can just like run away if you're taking a lot of damage. Yeah, and on top of that is her alignment that makes her very good at tanking. So a lot of enemies in this game will be using a lot of chaotic and evil spells. So notably, you know, Chaos Hammer, Word of Chaos, Blasphemy. These are all, you know, crippling spells if you against a tank, right? Especially if you have low saves, which I don't think Camellia has particularly low saves. Her like a shaman low reflex save is negated by the fact that she has high dexterity. Her fortitude save isn't the best, but it's not terrible either. So overall, she's immune to a lot of the very high level CC spells the enemy's going to throw at you, and she has decent AC, like I said, and her saves are not terrible. So I would put her as an S tier for tanking. Next we have Daeran. Now Daeran, in my opinion, is a C tier in terms of damage output. The only saving grace that he has is Hellfire Ray, and he has decent enough dexterity to make that work. But besides that, I don't think Destruction is very good, especially when you're playing on the higher levels. Enemies are just going to have enough fortitude save where it's just not going to do too much. And I think it's mostly Hellfire Ray that's going to do most of our damage. Now, the thing is once you reach end game, melee characters are always going to do more damage than range, or not range, but melee and range characters are going to do more than spellcasters. And that's because spellcasters are limited to one standard round of cast, one standard cast and one quick cast. So you can get 2 spells off in one round, and that just basically put a hard cap on how much damage output you can do. Now, it can still be a lot of damage, especially, you know, once, you know, especially Hellfire Ray, right? But that's, you know, all the spells they do cut off, and your caster level cannot go above 20, unlike the enemy. So like stuff like Finger of Death, Destruction, enemies can do a lot of damage because their spell or their caster level is above level 20, but yours isn't. So at the end of the day, yours cut off, and yeah, that's the reason why spell casters don't do enough damage. Like melee, you can get up to 5, 6, 7 attacks per round, and as long as you're buffing yourself consistently to the point where you can hit the enemy, and also proccing attacks of opportunities off, like spellcasters just don't do enough damage, in my opinion. They could do, consistent damage, especially a lot of the AOE's. They're just like reflexed for half, depending on whether the enemy has evasion or not. But yeah, like it's consistent damage, but not amazing. Next, we have his support, and I rank Daeran support as an A tier. He definitely is the best healer in the entire game, but that's about it, in my opinion. Compared to a cleric, you don't get like your domains. You don't get domains, which is one of the big downsides that makes clerics better than oracles, and you also get spells one level below that. So, yeah, so say for example you need an important spell for an upcoming fight. For example, you need Death Ward. Well, clerics get Death Ward one level earlier than Oracle. That said, Oracles do have a lot of special stuff, especially Daeran as a healer. He gets mass heal one level earlier than Sosiel because he gets it at spell level 8, and he also gets Heroic Invocation, which Sosiel doesn't. So that's very big. Although Heroic Invocation can be provided by both Ember and Nenio. He gets, so his healing is top notch for sure, but then his other stuff I think is a bit weaker than Sosiel. And I mean he does get everything else, right? He gets the summons, he gets the buffs, and he gets crowd control as the same as a cleric, but he just has less spells overall, so he's just not gonna have the range that a cleric has because it's a spontaneous caster and not just a regular caster in that sense. Okay, enough about that. In terms of his survivability, I will put him as a B tier in terms of survivability. He has decent ways of improving his AC. For example, if you go nature route, you could go get one of the mysteries that grants him charisma to AC. And with Archmage armor, his AC is not terrible. He also gets a lot of good spells, right? And that's what makes him better than Arueshalae in terms of tanking. Is that even though his stats and stuff might not be the best, I mean, after he gets the charisma to AC, his AC is not going to be terrible. But on top, what is it? Yeah, he gets spells, so he's going to get Winds of Vengeance, for example, and he's going to be in the back line, right? So your main threats are enemy archers and spells. Well, Winds of Vengeance is a 50% concealment against all range attacks. That is not pierced by true seeing, like I said. So that's going to improve his survivability a lot. He gets Frightful Aspect, which can also improve his AC. He gets, with the ring, Salamander ring, he gets Fiery Body. He gets, he's not super squishy. And that's why I put him as a B tier. He's definitely not a tank, but he can survive and hold his own. Next, we have Ember. And in terms of damage output, I rank Ember as an A tier. Now, a lot of people might disagree with me, but I stand firm by the fact that spellcasters do not do as much damage as like melee characters that gets a lot of attack of opportunities off and stuff like that. Your Hellfire Ray, again, it's what, 15d6 times 3? That's cap damage. So max like 290 damage. If you do a quicken one with a rod and then just a regular one, that's still, That's a lot of damage, don't get me wrong, but that is still a hard cap on your damage output. And that is basically the max that she can do. I guess she does have a lot of items to boost it up, so that's why she's a lot better than Daeran. She gets itemizations that could boost up her fire damage. She gets, if you go crossbow sorcerer and you do like a dip, and get some boost to fire damage, like the fire elemental bloodline or something like that. She can boost her damage output with like the fire dragon or red dragon and fire elemental. If you go into the arcane trickster, okay, if you go arcane trickster, I think her damage output can be S tier once you get like sneak attack die. But that is specifically for that. If you're just looking at just a regular, just blasting blaster caster, I think it's an A tier. In terms of her support capabilities, I would also rank her as an A tier. She gets healing, she gets buffs, and she gets crowd control. So like Camellia, you get hexes, and she gets a lot more hexes and better hexes too. She gets grand hexes, right? Her healing is not bad. She gets, of course, decent healing, and she gets also very good CC spells, unlike Camellia. So she gets a lot of the enchantment stuff, like Hold Monster Mass. She gets Feeble Mind. Like these are all very good CC spells that you could cast on enemies when the time comes. And she has enough DC to make it work because you're just going to be pumping everything into Charisma anyways. So I would recommend that you take Evocation and max that out first. School, mastery, and everything. And then you take, what do you call it, Expanded Arsenal and get enchantment. So her CC becomes very useful, along with her hexes. The only thing she's missing in the support category is summons. So that's why I think she's not at S tier. She's missing some summons. And it's not a big deal, but it's definitely something that she's lacking in that respect. Now, in terms of survivability, she's probably the squishiest character in the entire game for your party. Her AC can be improved with Archmage armor, but she doesn't get other spells like Shield, for example, and she doesn't get Frightful Aspect. She doesn't get Sea Mantle, and it just really hurts a lot. You need to use scrolls. If you use scrolls, she's C. Okay, but if you don't use scrolls on that and you just rely purely on self-buffing, like she is the squishiest character, and no Winds of Vengeance. Like, why is Winds of Vengeance so good? Is because yes, she's gonna be in the back line, so your main dangers for her are archers. If two archers decide to shoot her, right, she might just die in one round, even with Cape of Wasps. And Cape of Wasps is basically like a lesser version of Winds of Vengeance. It's a 20% concealment. It's only a round per level, so it's not as good. But if you're gonna go with her, you're probably gonna run Cape of Wasps for every encounter you're gonna have, just for that 20% concealment, and that's not pierced by True Seeing because it's a conjuration spell, not illusion. With that said, also actually her saves. Now, her saves are garbage. Again, she has will saves, but that's it. Her reflex save is not good. Her fortitude save is going to be terrible. If one person decides to use Finger of Death or Destruction on her, she just might die. And she would definitely be D tier because of that, of her saves. But she can be bumped into a C tier only if you bring Seelah in your party. And that's because Seelah has Divine Grace, and that allows her to give her Charisma bonus to her saving throw, which is a massive boost. That's like a +10, and that makes her a lot more survivable. And you're going to need that. So if you're going to run Ember, probably bring Seelah just for Bestowed Grace. So yeah, I would still put her as a D tier in terms of survivability. Like, you're going to need scrolls and you're going to need Seelah to make her into C tier. But if you're just evaluating based on just self buffs and stuff like that, so she's A in terms of damage output, A in terms of support, and D in terms of survivability. I want to put her in. Still, I want to put her in A tier because she's so good. But I mean, okay, assuming you use scrolls and stuff and say she's B tier in terms of survivability, I mean, it's still like an A minus in my opinion. She does a lot of damage, and she's very good in terms of supporting and crowd controlling, but it's because of her, her lack of survivability. She's going to be constantly dying if you're not careful with her, and that could be a big issue, especially when you're playing on the harder difficulties. She might just die in one round, and then you're going to have to either burn some diamonds to bring her back alive, which you don't want to do in the middle of combat, but you might just need to because she's going to be her source of damage output, source of support. Losing her would be totally detrimental to your party. Okay, next we have Finnean. I mean, what can I say? I mean, he's not a character that you're going to have to replace a party member with. You're always going to have him. So he's easily S tier. I mean, you're going to probably be using him if you don't have a really good weapon. Brilliant Energy is an amazing weapon property. And he becomes really powerful once you upgrade him. So I don't see any reason not to bring him. Like, he's easy S tier. Like S++, whatever, the highest tier there is. Okay, next we have what do you call it? Greybor, and in terms of damage, Greybor is S. He has a lot of sneak attack dice, and he just, he's just built to kill. He's a slayer. Okay, his main job is to kill enemies. I do want to note that the fact that you don't get +5 Dwarven Axe in this game, so it's kind of a shame that that's what he's decided to specialize in. And also, Dwarven Axes are not light weapons, so you can't really use it in your offhand without suffering the penalty to your attack on your offhand attack. So I do recommend, if you're gonna go dual wielding, probably be a shield basher if you're in melee. If you're not going to be in melee, then I recommend you do throwing axes. He's going to do a lot of damage, okay, with the proper feats and builds. But that's about he does, because his support is non-existent. I don't know what he brings in terms of support. I guess he get the quarry gloves that give sicken, and that is very good, but that is it. And Arueshalae can do that. She can quarry as well. So, I don't know. But when you consider everything, like, his support is just not really there. In terms of survivability, is C tier. I mean, he just not very survivable. Defensive quarry or defensive study target is good, but it's not amazing, and you're probably not even going to bring it. He's going to relying on his medium armor. I mean, if you're going to do the shield bashing, at least he's going to have more AC, but it's not enough to be to be very survivable. And if enemy decides to attack him in melee, he's going to take a lot of damage and potentially die. So, yeah, that's why I generally recommend making him a ranged character with throwing axes. You'll do a lot of damage without having the risk of dying. That said, he's still susceptible to enemy range fire and enemy spellcasters, because he doesn't have a lot of spells to buff himself with. So he's C in terms of survivability, S in terms of damage, D in terms of support. Yeah, I don't find him particularly useful, so I'm just gonna put him as a C tier, probably C minus. He doesn't bring enough, and maybe I need to build him slightly differently, but if I'm just going with, just a damaging route with a lot of Slayer levels, he doesn't contribute enough to the party, in my opinion. Next, we have Lann. Now, Lann, I think he's an S tier in terms of damage. Almost as good as Arueshalae. You can also give him Elemental Barrage, for example, with his with Genie Kind and stuff like that, so it's very strong. But he's gonna need, Divine Casting, and that's where I recommend you do. You take 3 levels of Zen Archer, or 5 levels, depending on what you want, and then point the rest into Divine Caster. So he's actually gonna be decent in support. But in terms of going back to his damage, like, he's a monk, right? So He's gonna get flurry of blows. He's gonna get perfect strike. So he's not gonna be missing too much. He's gonna have decent attacks, and he's gonna have a lot of attacks. Yeah. Zen Archer do a lot of damage in this game. Don't underestimate that. But and yeah, you only need to pump into Wisdom, right? And that's gonna help with the spell casting as a Divine Caster. So as support, if you go into Divine Caster, which I recommend you should, because if you go all out on Zen Archer, then he's probably like a D in terms of support. I just don't know what he brings. Like if you go all into Zen Archer, he does get a lot of good stuff like Diamond Body and stuff like that, but I don't recommend it. I mean, even if you go into just something like a Cleric afterwards, his saves are going to be high enough that he's not going to be too worried about, you know, stuff like poison, which you already going to have immunities to with delay poison anyways. So perfect body and diamond body, I don't think is as important. But going back to support, yeah, so just going to Divine Caster, he's going to be a Divine Caster, right? And then you're going to get domains. So then already there, he's going to be super powerful. What else? So domains. Yeah, I mean, that's about it. I mean, he's going to have... I mean, he's not going to have really bad DC, too. You might just want to boost up his spell penetration because you are multi-classing a bit, so he's not a pure caster. And he's going to be losing some spell penetration. So if you want to do some debuffs, like even Prayer, for example, you might want to have some spell penetration up. His Archon's Aura actually doesn't require spell pen, so that's good. But everything else, you know, if you're going to use anything from Holy Word to, you know, like Wave of Ecstasy and stuff like that, they're gonna require spell penetration. Even though his DC is not gonna be bad because you'll be pumping all into Wisdom. Now, I mean, the thing is his healing is not gonna be good, right? His channels and stuff is not gonna be good. So maybe I could argue that he's slightly B tier. But I don't know. If you just go into Cleric and get domains, I think you automatically qualify as an A. So I don't know. I think I'm gonna put him as A. In terms of survivability, I'm gonna put him as a B tier. Yeah, he's a Zen Archer. He's a monk. So monks are notoriously good at surviving. You know, he gets Wisdom to AC. He has a decent Dex to begin with. You know, you just need to buff him up. Like if you give him Archmage armor, he's gonna be actually a semi-tank, maybe even A tier. But if you don't go Archmage armor, which I don't recommend you do, like he's still gonna be decent enough that he's not gonna be super susceptible to death from enemy range, because that's where you're gonna be you're gonna take the most damage from. Like his saves are not gonna be bad because first of all, monks have some of the best saves in the entire game, and second of all, if you go Cleric, only his reflex save is gonna be bad, but he has at least decent enough dexterity that it's not gonna be that big of an issue. And even if it's a big issue, just give him a, you know, like some items to improve his dex save, because clerics get good fortitude and goodwill. So yeah, B tier if you go Archmage armor, A tier, but I don't recommend Archmage armor. So S in terms of damage, A in terms of support, B in terms of survivability. I put him as a mid A, so higher than the other two because these are low A in my opinion. Next we have Nenio, and Nenio is a B in terms of damage output. So same problem as Daeran, in that you're gonna get, you know, basically maximum 2 spells off per round, and that just puts a hard cap on you. And she does less damage than Nenio, or not Nenio, than Ember, for sure. You could go the Ascendant Element route, but you know, I find it she's more useful in other aspects, especially in terms of support, but we'll get there later. She does get Weird, and Weird will improve her damage output a lot because it's basically a one-shot kill if you beat their saves, but it's not super consistent on the higher difficulties. And basically on unfair, it's just never gonna really trigger that often. Maybe only on like trash mobs, but like those are gonna die pretty easily as well. So on hard and on normal, especially if you pump her illusion DC up a lot, she's gonna actually do a lot of damage. Because otherwise, you're gonna be mostly relying on stuff like magic missile, snowball. I mean, the blasting bolt, that level 3 magic missile attack, and yeah, so mostly those are gonna be your damage. You could boost her force damage up a bit, but that's about it. But you mostly want to be maximizing her DC, right? Now, in terms of her support, she's an S tier, okay? Wizards have the most extensive spellbook in the entire game. She can learn everything from scrolls, and if she can't learn them from scrolls, she can cast scrolls. So she basically, yeah, she casts scrolls at her as her class level, which is amazing. And there are items in the game that boost your caster level based off of if you're casting from a scroll, and she could go above caster level 20 just by using scrolls, and that is just amazing. So like she's probably the only one I think that could go above caster level 20 because of just using scrolls. What else is she good for support? Like she doesn't have healing, okay? That's the only thing she doesn't have, but everything else, well, actually she does have healing if you assume that she could use wands and use scrolls. So I mean, if you just buy a lot of mass heal scrolls off, she's going to be doing as well as everyone else, basically, in terms of healing. She gets summons. She gets great buffs, you know, all the animal buffs that you get at the lower game. But then, like, you know, you also have heroic invocation, and all the heroism tree, basically. She gets good debuffs. So, you know, illusion, yes, at low level it's not very good. She does have the illusion ray attack that blinds, which is decent. But at low levels, I recommend you go conjuration, because those, first of all, have no spell resistance checks. So they bypass any spell resistance without any spell penetration feats, which is very important at low levels. And then at higher levels, you know, you just go into just max out on illusion, and you just get, you know, putrefy. You get the phantasmal web. That should cover basically everything you need for CC. Yeah, and her DCs are just going to be actually usable on the higher difficulties. What else? Her skill checks are amazing. That's another, I think, part of being support. It's just her fact that she has amazing skill checks. And yeah, she just gives a lot to your party. In terms of survivability, I would put her as a B tier. And that's because she, with a lot of self buffs, with Archmage armor, she can reach a respectable AC and have decent concealment. So Winds of Vengeance, 50% from range. I don't need to go over that more. She can go invisible with invisibility field. She can, what do you call it? She has a frightful aspect. She has sea mantle. She has icy body. She has fiery body. All of this stuff is going to make her very survivable. And she's not going to be your main tank, obviously, but she's not going to be weak. Her saves are a bit low, but then with Master Shape Change with Kasune, you get a +4 to all your physical stats. So that's another +2 to your reflex, to your fortitude. And her will save is generally high, right? Because she's a caster. And also you get the surgery she gets at the Battle Bliss, which is another +2 to all her saves. So overall, her saves are not terrible. Yeah, that's what I have to say. Because she's Kitsune, she has a lot of buffs. She gets the surgery. You do have to be careful, of course, with the surgery. She might just go berserk and just suicide, but you have to be careful with her regardless anyways. And she's basically, I mean, she's a lot more tanky than Ember, except for the fact that Ember probably has better saves if you use Bestow Grace, but that's the only situation. Next we have Regill, and in terms of damage output, I would put Regill as an A tier. He does decent damage. He's basically using a two-handed weapon, but also, but he uses dex to damage, right? And dex to damage will never be as high as strength to damage in this game. Strength to damage is always the highest, but he gets a lot of attacks. So you want to be comboing him with Unrelenting Assault and Hammer the Gap. And that's how you boost his damage up. But it's still not insane. It's not like Elemental Barrage where you get like a 10d6 per every hit. Okay, that Elemental Barrage is just insane. And, you know, you could get Leading Strike and all these other stuff to boost his, or at least help him, or boost the party's overall damage. But his own damage output, I don't find it particularly amazing. In terms of his support, he gets Domain as a Hell Knight, but you know, it's still not great. And, I mean, it's not enough. He doesn't get... Does he get Impossible Domain? I don't know. If he gets Impossible Domain, maybe I could see him being B. But I haven't played him enough to know. And, like, I think Clerics still just have more stuff. Like, Clerics... I mean, depending on your, obviously, your alignment and stuff like you choose, you might be limited in your domain selection. But, I mean, I guess with Impossible Domain, that opens up everything, right? I mean, I guess if he has Impossible Domain, that opens up for him all, like, the non-lawful stuff, non-evil lawful stuff, then maybe he's B tier. But I don't think he has that. And I think if you do want to be a support character, you have to build him as a Scald. Which is good, but his charisma is not even the highest. I mean, you don't need particularly high charisma for Skull. Like the 14 charisma that he has is sufficient. So I guess maybe that is one way to boost up his utility. But if you're just going to go into Hell Knight, he doesn't offer enough. He does have the ability to turn, I believe, frightened enemies or shaken enemies into frightened as a Hell Knight ability, which is good. But his base persuasion is just not that great. I mean, it's decent, but he doesn't... This is a problem because he's a Dex character, so he doesn't get Intimidating Display. And you cannot just add your... And his strength is just not good enough. You know, you don't want to be pumping strength. So Intimidating Display into Persuasion is not... into boosting your Persuasion is not a viable strat for him. So his Persuasion is still not going to be good. And he gets Smite Chaos. That's not bad. But that's it. I mean, I don't know. I don't think he offers enough in terms of his support capabilities. In terms of his survivability, I put him also as like a high C tier. Like, he's not very survivable, but he's better than Greybor in terms of survivability. He gets some damage reduction. He gets heavy armor training. So that's really nice. His dex is really high because that's what you're going to be pumping into. But that's about it. You could be higher if you go into like something like the Scaled Fist monk archetype. Then he can be an A, because you go Scaled Fist, then you go into Archmage armor and stuff like that. But then, like, again, you're defeating the purpose, that the fact that he's a Hell Knight and he needs and he already had points into heavy armor training. One other thing about his tanking is the fact that he's evil. Evil is good. Like I said before, you're not going to be affected by Blasphemy, but you are going to be affected by, by Chaos Hammer, by Word of Chaos. So not as good as Camellia in that sense, because because enemies are chaotic evil and they use chaotic evil spells. So he's going to be good against evil spells, but not the chaos spells. So he's not totally immune to those. So I put him as C tier in terms of survivability. So overall, he gets A in terms of damage, B in terms of utilities if you go Scald, but if you just go regular Hell Knight, it's C, and that's, I think, the loreful way of playing him. And also C in terms of survivability. And I don't know if I rank him above Greybor or below Greybor. Like, they're pretty close because Greybor was S, D, C. He is A, C, C. So about the same. But if I have to guess, I'll probably take Regill over Greybor. I don't know. It depends. Maybe the other way around. Is what I mean. I'm not gonna fuss over it too, but these two are interchangeable in my opinion. Okay, next we have Seelah. So Seelah, in terms of damage, she's a B tier. She's a full BAB class, right? So that's good at least. She's gonna get 20 to attack by the end of the game. If you're at least gonna be, if you're multi-classing, at least you're gonna be sticking to like martial classes. What else? She can boost her damage and attack rolls up, especially if you get divine favor. That's a +3 to attack and damage. She gets Eagle Soul, so that's another stuff. So she has some decent buffing, but she doesn't get a lot of uses of those. Yeah, you could boost her damage more with other feats and stuff, but you know she doesn't get weapon specialization. She doesn't get a greater weapon focus, unless if you go into fighter and stuff like that. You could go and make her a shield bash character because there are a lot of good spike shields in this game. Very good spike shields in this game. But and Radiance, of course, is a very strong strong longsword. So she, with Radiance, you know, with Bane and all these other stuff, she is not going to be missing too much, especially when all buffed up. So she can do decent damage. So maybe even A tier if you're all buffed up. But just regularly, she's B tier in terms of damage output. In terms of support, I would put her as an A tier. She has a lot to offer in terms of support from her spells, particularly the Greater Courage aura that gives everybody immunity, which is very important in this game. Until you get Heroic Invocation. Until you get Heroic Invocation, then that doesn't really matter. What else? You get Bestow Grace. So, yes, all your good aligned characters that have decent enough charisma needs Bestow Grace on her. Particularly Ember, or else she's just going to die to one finger of death and you're going to be complaining why you need to restart the game on a Lasazanti mode, because she's also your support and your damage output character. But yeah, so with Bestow Grace, she's gonna get something. Ember's gonna get something like a +10 to her saves. Yeah, no, she's not gonna be dying to a finger of death now. With that said, she is limited in her spell selection, but what's more important is the fact that she gets Mark of Justice. And Mark of Justice is one of the best ability in this game. So against any evil character, basically, she applies her charisma bonus to attack and damage rolls, I believe, and also negates all damage reduction for your entire party member. That is just insane. There's just so much synergy with everything in your party, and that's why she's an easy A tier. You could do some stupid stuff with Mark of Justice. For example, K-Fang is a broken spell with Mark of Justice, but I won't get into that much detail. But just Mark of Justice makes a lot of stuff work, just by bypassing damage resistance. So she's an A tier in terms of support. In terms of tanking, she's S tier. Okay, she's S tier if you go into Scale Fist, because she's lawful. She could go into Scale Fist, and she has decent enough charisma for that. Then you have to take Archmage Armor. You have to do a lot of other spell buffs. You know, you need Sea Mantle, you need Firefall Aspect, all these other stuff. Yeah, but she might not be able to get that. I mean, you're gonna have to do a lot of multi-classing to make it work. I mean, if she goes on a horse, her horse then is an A tier in terms of tanking. But if you don't go horse, she's S tier, and you go like the full, you know, untouchable AC type of strap build. But then that means you're not wearing armor, right? You're going full Scale Fist, Archmage Armor, Crane Style, that kind of build. In terms of her saves, she has amazing saves. She can Bestow Grace on herself. So on top of Divine Grace, Bestow Grace, that's twice the charisma bonus to all your saves. So she's not going to be afraid of spells. Yeah. And, I mean, she's good and she's lawful, so she's going to be susceptible to, I guess, the the Chaos Hammers, the Blasphemy, the Chaos Word. But because of her saves, you're not going to be too worried with her. And you want Last Stand, obviously, on her if she's going to be your main tank. She definitely can tank if you build her that way. If you go with Horse, she becomes A tier in terms of tanking. But then you basically get another, just a free 200 or 300 HP on top of that. So it's not bad. Especially if properly buffed, the Horse can be very decent, but just not as good as an untouchable AC build in terms of tanking. So if you evaluate her, she's S in tanking, A in terms of support, B in terms of damage, and that's unbuffed damage. If she's buffed up, she's an A tier. I would put her as a very solid A, maybe close to high A. Yeah, a lot of people might not like Paladins, but Paladins are pretty decent in this game. And I do recommend you at least get to level 11 for Mark of Justice and get the Abundant Smiting mythic ability. Okay, next we have Sosiel. And Sosiel, in terms of damage, I think he's a B tier. So like Daeran and all the other spellcasters, your damage per round is capped if you're going to be using stuff like Destruction, right? And you might not pass all the enemy saves, but you're not going to be using that. And you're not going to be using Hellfire Ray either because his dex is just terrible. You're going to be using melee, you're going to be using Vital Strike because he's a cleric and he's, you know, like if he's only going to get so many attacks per round, like 4 attacks with the greater Vital Strike, which is basically how much you get base anyways. And with Mythic Vital Strike, he's going to be actually doing decent damage. You know, hundreds of damage per hit, potentially. He's going to be using Glaives, and he's still going to get attacks of opportunities off, especially if you have the Teamwork Feast with him. And so he's not going to be terrible. And because he can buff himself up, he buffs himself up with Divine Power, with Righteous Might. You know, he could be able to do decent damage, you know, comparable to like a full BAB class. Like, there's no doubt about that. It's just that you need the buffs, and those are round per level buffs, so buff up before you go into every encounter. Use the glaive. Sit behind your front line, and he'll just be adding extra damage with his reach attacks. Now, in terms of his support, he's S tier, and he's better than Daeran, in my opinion, because of domains and impossible domains, and you can get as many domains as you want. He starts off with 2, which is not bad. Good and luck are not terrible, but I wish, you know, there's some way of actually like just improving his duration on his domain spells and abilities. But you want to be getting community domain, you want to be getting nobility domain, you want to be getting animal domain if possible, and even madness domain if you so chooses. Like, those are amazing domains, and those are just because of that makes him an S tier character outright, especially with Domain Zealot, where you can cast those domains as a swift action. What can I say? He has everything. He can summon, he can buff, he can heal, and he can provide CC, all with good DC. And he's going to have decent spell penetration because he's a full level caster, assuming that's what you go for. And yeah, he's better than Daeran, just because Cleric is better than Daeran, even though his build might not be the most optimal beginning at the start. In terms of survivability, I put him as a C tier. Daeran, at least, you know, gonna be not close to melee. Like, for example, he's not going to be in melee, but he still might be able to get hit by other reach characters and large enemies. So if another large enemy targets him, he might just take a lot of damage, right? You're going to have to use your reach. You're going to have to use legendary proportions just to negate that. And yeah, his AC is not good. You're going to have to use a Belt of Alacrity to just not only give him reflex saves, but I mean, I don't know, maybe I put him as B tier. I mean, you have spells like you know, like Winds of Vengeance and all these other stuff. So it's gonna help him. His AC is never gonna be amazing, but you're not gonna be too close to the enemy at least. And it's, I mean, somewhere between B and C in terms of survivability. Okay, so S in terms of support, B in terms of damage, B or C um, in terms of survivability. I would put him as a B. I'll put him above Daeran just because when you bring a cleric, that's where you're gonna mostly is their support, and he brings a lot more to the table with domains than Daeran with his mysteries. You only get one. You only get one second mystery, whereas you can get to 5+ domains if you wish to, which is just insane. And you don't need that many, but that's how many you can get. Next, we have Wenduag, and Wenduag, she's really flexible because you get her very early on in the game, and you can build her however you want. So she can become a very high damaging character. Especially, I see a lot of builds with the dual axis, and those are very good. You proc attack of opportunity with snapshot, and she's going to be doing a lot of insane damage. Whether you go into like Slayer levels, even more into Fighter. The only shame is that she went into regular Fighter and not something like Mutation Warrior, which just is so much better. But I don't know. We had to take what we get. So as in terms of damage, in terms of her support, you could go into something like Hunter and improve her support capabilities while also getting a pet. And it's kind of thematic for her because she is a hunter in the game or in the story. So if you go into some like sort of divine casting, I think she's a B tier. She's not as good as Lann because Lann just needs wisdom. But she's gonna need to add extra wisdom, but you're not gonna be adding extra wisdom because you're gonna be mostly adding to dexterity because you want to improve her to hit chance. So that's that. In terms of survivability, I put her as a C or B tier. I can't tell. Maybe low B, high C because she is evil. But then like her AC is gonna be decent. You could spec her out to become more decent in melee if you wish to, but I don't recommend it. And yeah, I mean her tanking is not amazing. It's not like Lann. Lann gets dexterity to AC. She still just has to rely on, or not dexterity, wisdom to AC. She just has to rely on dexterity, and that's just not good enough on the higher difficulties. And she can't spec into any of the monk classes because she's not lawful. She can go into Instinctual Warrior, but I don't recommend it. Yeah, I don't know. I think C in terms of survivability, like a high C, low B for support, and S for damage. I think she is a high B tier. I'll put her above Daeran but below Sosiel. But she is really flexible, so you could make her, like I could see her being even A tier or being C tier. Okay, last we have Woljif. Now Woljif in terms of damage, he's A, but he could easily be bumped up into S. What can I say? He's dual wielding. You can get Elemental Barrage with Genie Kind, and or with other ways. And then he gets Sneak Attack die, but his Sneak Attack die is not the best progression, so that's a bit sucky for him. But yeah, I mean, his damage is never bad when you get both Sneak Attack and Elemental Barrage, like, for example, Arueshalae. What else can I say in terms of damage? If you go, you could bump his damage output higher if you need to, but I mostly see him as A. Like, his to hit is not amazing, so you're going to need to cast Transformation on yourself to become a full BAB class fighter. But that is also a bit risky because you can't cast any spells on yourself during that time. I don't know. I mean, since he's dual wielding, I can see him being even S tier in terms of damage. But his 2-hit, you need to cast Transformation to do damage on higher enemies. In terms of his support, I find him like he falls off so fast after Act 2. And yeah, he just doesn't offer enough. Like in the early game, his greases and his webs and his stinking clouds and stuff is going to be very good. But then late game, it's just not going to do anything. And his DC is not going to be high enough because you're going to be pumping Dex and not his intelligence. Yeah, so I think I put him as a B tier. He doesn't get level 6, above level 6 spells. He gets level 6 and that's it, but no higher. So you're going to be missing some of the better buffs, foresights and stuff like that. So you're going to need everybody else to do the casting. He still gets the heroism tree, but no heroic invocation. Yeah, I mean B tier. Now, in terms of his tanking, a lot of people would say he's an S tier in tank. And in the early game, he's definitely an S tier with the illusion stuff. But then later on, when enemies get a true seeing, that pierces illusion. All defensive illusion buffs. So that's just not going to be good. He's going to be relying on Blink instead. And Blink like reduces your damage output. So that's not good. But you have to use it. Otherwise, you have to use scrolls. So with scrolls, you could get Sea Mantle, you could get a Frightful Aspect, you could get even Foresight, but Foresight somebody else can cast it on him. So that's that. So you can bump up his AC that way. But his biggest reason why I don't think he's an S tier is because his saves are terrible. His will and his fort save in particular. His dex is going to be ridiculous because all you're going to be doing is pumping dex. His reflex save is going to be ridiculous because all you're going to be doing is pumping his dex. But then that's not good enough. Like if he gets if he's your main tank, and somebody decides to dominate him, it's like, what are you gonna do now, right? Like even with Mind Blank, his will save is gonna be terrible, and you're gonna need Slippery Mind then, if he's gonna be your main tank. And then on top of that, or at least some item to give a mind control immunity. And on top of that, his fort save is terrible. So I don't know particularly how to improve his fort save, because, like, say for example, one Finger of Death, enemies have like ridiculous caster level in this game. Okay, you could be facing caster level 30 or above. Like, Finger of Death or Destruction is uncapped damage. So it could be like, say for example, against a level 30 caster, that's 300 damage, upwards of 300 damage. Playing on Unfair, that gets doubled to 600 damage. He dies in one round. Okay, so, and there's nothing you can do about it because his fort save is terrible. And also, he's not evil. I mean, he can be evil, and if you do make him evil, his tanking becomes better because he's not going to be susceptible to the chaotic evil stuff. So, no blasphemy, no word of chaos is going to affect him, and that's going to make him a lot better at tanking. But aside from that, he's gonna, I don't know, his saves are just too low for him to be a main tank. If you send him in as your front line tank, that's what you're supposed to do. And there's a high level caster, dies in one hit from Destruction because enemies love to spam Destruction, or a Finger of Death, or any other high level spell that's not reflex save. So yeah, I can't recommend him as a high S tier in terms of tanking. It has to be like a A or a low A in my opinion. And also, it's the fact that intelligence to AC is much harder to boost than charisma to AC in Seelah's case, or wisdom to AC in Camellia's case. So you're gonna have to take either levels in Duelist or Sword Saint, which could be good, but I don't know. I don't know if it's the best. And he's still never going to be as good as Seelah or Camellia in terms of tanking spell damage. That's not reflex save. Okay, reflex save, he's the best. But yeah. He like I said, he might just die to one Finger of Death. So overall, S or A in terms of damage, A in terms of tanking, and B in terms of support. He's an A tier, I guess. Maybe high B tier. I put him high B tier because I don't think he's a high S or high enough to become A tier. And it's just because I feel like everybody else does something slightly better than him. He doesn't get really high spell levels to be useful as a support. He's not the most tankiest characters, especially against high-level necromancy spells. And his damage can be very insane, but you're gonna need transformation. Yeah. So, what can I say? This is what I think the tier list look like, and this is based purely off of my experience with the game. So, depending on how you build your characters, you might have a different opinion than mine. And if you do, please share your thoughts in the comment section below. I would happy to learn more from you guys. And with that, thank you for watching and have a good day.